So Shodo is the Dharma heir of Shohaku Okumura. Her first teacher was Katagiri Roshi. Shodo's practice focuses on our relationships with all sentient beings through the organization called Mountains and Waters Alliance. In 1988, she spent a year at Hokyoji with the trees and hills in daily practice. And in 2013, she walked across the Great Plains in the Compassionate Earth Walk. She's working on her second book. Okay. Thank you, Shodo, for joining us today.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here.
Good.
And it's kind of fun to hear the introduction again. Oh yeah, all those things. Hopefully the next time I'll be able to say I have an offer on it, but we'll wait until it happens. So as I thought about what I would say today, I was kind of noticing world events. So I won't spend much time on them. In the past week, maybe, we've had an uprising in Syria with unknown results. We've had a nonviolent uprising in South Korea by people who simply refused to do what they were told. Apparently, there are mysterious drones circling some areas in the eastern United States, and nobody knows what that's about. And the one that really got my attention was a man who killed an executive of United Healthcare Company. And that's not what was so amazing. What was so amazing was the response after that. It's gotten my attention. I hear, and I guess I actually heard a few statements about how terrible this was and how one should never take violence and so forth, by people who did not say the same thing about Kyle Rittenhouse or anybody who killed a poor person or a person of color. But overwhelmingly, and my reading of the populace mostly comes through Facebook. People were praising him, celebrating, suggesting it should be done more, offering justifications, citing their own personal experiences with health insurance denials and subsequent deaths. And I watched all this with sort of mixed feelings. And so this is the hardest puzzle in my life. I myself, as a provider, do not accept United Health coverage because they pay terribly and are always pulling back their payments. But I certainly did not know that that their history with customers and consumers was like that, nor did I ever imagine violence. So just trying to study the situation, I went to the Buddha and I found a few sayings from the Sutta Nipata, or a few sections, and I'm going to read them, and then I'll try to say a few words about how they might be helpful to us right now. And of course, I don't know what you all are thinking. I assume that no one here is in favor of murder outright. So we have number 15 on violent conduct in the chapter of the eights. And he says, fear results from resorting to violence. Just look at how people quarrel and fight. But let me tell you now of the kind of dismay and terror that I have felt. Seeing people struggling like fish writhing in shallow water with enmity against one another, I became afraid. At one time, I had wanted to find some place where I could take shelter, but I never saw any such place. There is nothing in this world that is solid at base, and not a part of it that is changeless. So I'm going to pause right there. When I look around me, I look at what I think is coming, and I look at what is happening. I look at the people doing what we call evil, which includes massive killing, starvation, torture, and my country in my name funding such things. I become appalled, and I'm looking for a place where this stuff doesn't happen. There's nothing in this world that is solid at base, and not a part of it that is changeless. I had seen them all trapped in mutual conflict, and that is why I had felt so repelled. So we look around us, and whether it's people doing violence, or people making up stories, or people wanting revenge, there they are, trapped in mutual conflict. And whatever parts of us are tempted to enter that conflict, it's truly horrifying. But then I noticed something buried deep in their hearts. It was, I could just make it out, a dart. It is a dart that makes its victims run all over the place. But once it has been pulled out, all that running is finished, and so is the exhaustion that comes with it. And so he, as always, he's offering that there is a direction that just isn't found in the world. These are the things we can learn from this. The bonds of the world should not be pursued. Disenchanted with all sense pleasures, one should train oneself in calmness. A man, a person of wisdom, should be truthful without arrogance, without deceit, not slanderous and not hateful. They should go beyond the evil of greed and miserliness. So the evil of greed, it's interesting because there's a question of what counts as greed. I have simplified my life a fair amount. I currently get food from the food shelf, and I will say there is plenty of food there. So I don't feel guilty about it. I don't feel like I should drive myself to the bone paying for everything myself when it's going to be thrown away. I feel fine about doing that. And I'm thinking I want warmth. I want my car to work. I'm a little worried about it right now. It was stalling out yesterday. And so greed and miserliness. Oh, every day I get multiple requests for donations. And it's like I've got myself set on automatic to say no, because there are too many of them, and sending $5 to 100 people doesn't help any of them very much. So is that being miserly? I think if anyone were to make accusations of me, they would accuse me of being miserly. But I look at myself and I say, greed, you don't need to eat that much chocolate. You could gather more food from the woods. You could burn the fires and use less propane and so forth. And you don't have to take that car trip. So, what is going beyond those questions like that? I mean, I look around me at ordinary American life and I see greed. So, but judgment is my core personal challenge. To have your mind set on calmness, you must take power over sleepiness, drowsiness, and lethargy. There is no place for laziness and no recourse to pride. That's actually a high standard. Do not be led into lying. Do not be attached to forms. You must see through all pride and fare along without violence. Do not get excited by what is old. Do not be contented with what is new. Do not grieve for what is lost or be controlled by desire. One person on today's, within my family, people say, what do you want for Christmas? And one surprising person put world peace on his list. I went, yes. We crave for world peace, but we don't crave for the kind of authoritarian peace that leaves some individuals very much without peace. So we're picking and choosing. And as I look into the future and, fears about future, because I don't think I'm a very high target, but I don't think I'm one of the people who would be protected if things get very bad. Do not grieve for what is lost or be controlled by desire. So the Buddha advises us not to wish for different things. I am suddenly reminded of a passage in the New Testament from St. Paul, and I forget who he was writing to, but he wrote, servants, be faithful to your masters, not only to the good and gentle, but even to the froward. And so to invest our calmness in the thought of having honest and peaceful government is actually not recommended by Buddha. I call this craving the greed a great flood, and the hankering I call attachment hanging up. This bog of lust is difficult to cross. But the man of wisdom, the person of wisdom, stands on solid ground, like a Brahman, never moving from the truth. And when he has completely renounced them, then indeed is he calm. So I'm having a little craving about pronouns here. I think I'll just read them the way they are. I'm understanding that this comes from a culture in which women didn't have sex, including the culture of the translator, which is much more recent than the time of the Buddha. He has wisdom. He has complete knowledge. He has understood the way things are. He is completely independent. In his perfect wanderings from place to place, he has no envy for anyone. And how to, as an individual, be at peace. Desire is a chain shackled to the world, and it is a difficult one to break. But once that is done, there is no more grief and no more longing. The stream has been cut off, and there are no more chains. Let there be nothing behind you. Leave the future to one side. Do not clutch at what is left in the middle. Then you will become a wanderer and calm. In our culture, to be a wanderer is not praised. It's not considered the ideal way of life. I've had the good fortune to have some contact with cultures that do praise that way of life. And the one I'm remembering is when I was at Green Gulch Farm for the first time. And there were a lot of young people passing through, and I was in my 50s. And these young people who were passing through a Green Gulch on their journey through life shared my values. It was quite lovely. They were talking about places where you could go and volunteer for 6 months on a research vessel in the ocean somewhere. Or they were talking about going to join the tree sitters. And they weren't thinking about profit or fame. They weren't thinking about security. Now that was something close to 20 years ago. And so they're all 40 now, probably. And I wonder if they've settled into thinking about security, thinking about comfort, thinking about having enough food and warmth and an absence of mosquitoes. They might be. And if they have children, they'll be thinking about them. So I think one of the reasons for recommending celibacy was so that one would not have children to worry about. Because everything changes when you're looking at a child and they go, I'm hungry. I wanted to be a wanderer. I still dream about it, but I have now done it. I did it for 3 months, and I remember some things. I remember painful feet and aching backs. I don't think we were hungry so much. I remember having difficulty finding a place to park the van or to pitch our tents. We traveled with an old school bus, converted school bus. I remember being chased out of places and being stopped by the police. And having arguments with the other people in the group about how we should have responded to the police. I was nice to them. They were not Buddhists and they thought various things. But they went along with me and did not start fights. And we did not actually get arrested. And I learned how to sleep under a tarp with 100 million mosquitoes buzzing right outside of it. And so when I think about taking a long walk again, which I do think about, some of those memories come back to me. And I am 20 years older. No, 20? No, I'm 10 years older now than I was then. So, yeah. Being calm and not having expectations, and then desiring a different way. In his perfect wanderings from place to place, he has no envy for anyone. You know, that was a kind of a magical time. And I don't remember envying anyone that I met. I don't remember wanting anything. Yeah, I wanted there to be fewer arguments. But there wasn't somebody I would have liked to trade places with. Desire is a chain shackled to the world, and it is a difficult one to break, to put it mildly. But once that is done, there is no more grief and no more longing. The stream has been cut off, and there are no more chains. Let there be nothing behind you. Leave the future to one side. Now, in this time, this is so difficult. Before the election, we were all, well, I don't know. people had opinions and preferences. Our preferences were pretty clear. And then after the election, our preferences are also pretty clear. And it's like, it feels like collectively we're freaking out. Do not clutch at what is left in the middle. Then you will become a wanderer and calm. When a man does not identify with mind and matter at all, does not grieve for what does not exist, then he cannot sustain any loss in this world. You know, and I read things like this, and I wonder about people in Gaza who have lost pretty much everything, including the future and including the past. And it's like, oh, what would I do? What would I do in that situation? And I have no idea. None of us can know what we would do if everything was taken away from us. If you ask me to describe a man who is unshakable, I say that where there is no harshness, where there is no greed, no trace of desire, and when a man is the same in all circumstances, then you have what I would call the praiseworthy condition of a man unshakable. Now, I cannot claim I am still planning that my shoulder is going to recover, and I'm planning that I'm going to beat the kidney disease. And so I cannot even come close to pretending to be free from desire. But finding a way to live in the middle. And what does it say? Do not clutch at what is left in the middle. It's like, I don't know what will happen. There's a physical integrity that has to do with those medical things that I mentioned. And I do my best to live with that physical integrity. And I'm right now at a time of increasing my practice. I sat Rohatsu alone. I did not, in theory, I said 12 hours a day. I didn't even come close to it. And I noticed that my practice is a little slack. And so I'm trying to get a little more discipline and to get up in the morning. And it definitely helps to put on my robes, to get up, to go to the zendo, ring the bell, do the service. And then I think this is not clutching and just making my way through each day, doing the things that are mine to do. Where there is no harshness, where there is no greed, no trace of desire, the same in all circumstances, then you have what I would call the praiseworthy condition of a person unshakable. So I actually can't do this pronoun thing. A person of discernment without a flutter of desire does not accumulate, has no conditioning, has stopped all effort of every kind, everywhere sees peace and happiness. The wise one does not rate himself with the distinguished, the lowest, nor with ordinary people. Calm and unselfish, this person is free from possessiveness, holds on to nothing, and rejects nothing. And so here we are. I don't match that standard. And when I was on that walk, I remember overhearing a conversation in which I had just gotten mad at somebody. And so I was like everybody else was around 20 years old. And one of these was somebody I knew before, and he was also, I don't know, probably late 20s or so. Anyway, somebody was saying, I don't think Shodo is enlightened. And Aaron, my friend, said, I think she knows that. Just laughed. It's like you say you do Zen and they think you've made a claim. Oh. Oh, okay. So then I found this other piece um, in a section called The Way to the Beyond. And in the story, there's a Brahmin named Bavari, and he has not yet heard of the Buddha, but he's a very sincere practitioner. And somebody said rude things to him, and he was upset. And a goddess came and comforted him and told him that the Buddha had been born. So he just was lifted to the heights of joy, felt immense delight take over, and he sent 12 of his students to go seek out the Buddha. And the Buddha did a little magic, reading their minds and answering their questions without them asking. And then he invited them to ask questions. And Ajita said, "What is it that smothers the world? What makes the world so hard to see? What would you say pollutes the world and what threatens it most?" "It is ignorance which smothers," said the master, "and it is carelessness and greed which make the world invisible. The hunger of desire pollutes the world, and the great source of fear is the pain of suffering." "In every direction," said Ajita, "the rivers of desire are running. How can we dam them, and what will hold them back? What can we use to close the floodgates?" "Any river can be stopped with the dam of mindfulness," said the Buddha. "I call it the flood stopper. And with wisdom, you can close the floodgates." And I'm going to stop right there. With mindfulness and wisdom, you can close the floodgates. And we begin by closing them inside of ourselves. If we live in the time of floods, there will be things that need to be done. But if we ourselves are flooded internally, we will not be able to use. Mm. And that feels like where I want to stop reading. I found a few other things, and I don't want to tell any more stories about myself. So let me ask, I suppose I should check if anyone else feels like there's a flood happening in the world around us. And if anyone is tempted to feel flooded and overwhelmed, helpless, wanting to escape, any of those things. And actually, if you have not, you might know something that the rest of us need to know. I think I'm doing as well as or better than most of the people around me. And so I try to offer a little something. But yeah, if people have those things, and then what's the most frightening? And how are you resourcing? How are you finding practice in the middle of overwhelming? And so I'll stop and invite responses.
I would ask the assembly, has anyone uh, stopped or not stopped, but decreased the amount of reading the news lately? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just, you know, when our new president, newly elected president, was president previously, I read the news like maybe 10 times a day, wondering if there was like a war started somewhere that I didn't know about. But now I'm deliberately only looking at the news once in the morning and not
Oh,
back to it. So when I, when being I have a somewhat of a public life, I have to know if some tragic thing happened in the morning, and I'm not aware of it. That's not going to be good. So, so anyway, that's something. I actually think that's a strategy that might be actually productive. I think there's just too much information sometimes. So it's not to be ignorant or withdraw, but yeah, I mean, you got to slow it down. You got to slow it down. And I did extend my trip by 2 weeks of my time outside of the USA. My,
Oh, wow. Nice.
who knows when I retire how much time I'll actually spend in the USA. So those are
Hmm.
thoughts I've been thinking. So I'll be quiet now and let everyone else speak.
Well, thank you for bringing up because that's like the big one. And I am not down to once a day, but
Mm.
I'm backing off considerably.
Let's just say I'm trying to do only once a day.
Yes, right.
Okay,
Thanks.
you're welcome. And I'll just add, you doing Rohatsu session by yourself. That definitely is would be a challenge, and even doing what you did demonstrates you have a lot more discipline than I do. So could not do
Well,
I could not do something like or even think about doing something like that by myself.
well, I do have the example of my friend Shoryu Bradley,
Oh yeah, yeah.
who moved off to into Hermitage. And I said once, "Are you actually keeping the schedule?" And he said, "Well, but I do the sashins, and that's 5 days, 14 hours. It's probably not 14 hours because he has to cook and stuff. I set mine at 12 hours. Um, but that's like, so I had days that were three. I had days that I played computer solitaire and checked my email, which after putting all the auto replies on everything, it was like really embarrassing.
I'm
And
actually quite happy to hear that.
I thought confession is helpful to everyone. Um, and so let me see. On day three, I decided I better start listening to Dharma talks. So I listened to Upaya Dharma talks. And then I thought, yeah, it's not so good, because then I was online, right? Um, and then I had today when I sat for 8 hours and it felt very good. And then I had a day when I tuned into the Dharma talk again. It was like, wow, somehow he said just the right things. And I sat up till midnight having that, what did they call it? Physical and mental comfort and ease, or some expression like that. I actually had a little bit of shamatha out of my 7 days. And I've been doing this long enough to know that if you sit every day, sesshin goes better. So I'm now in full aspirational mode. But this morning I didn't. I just said, okay, I have an hour of sitting. That will be okay. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you very much for your Dharma talk. Would you share the source? I think I missed it. The source of your reading this morning. Oh, okay.
Yes.
So could
The
you? I'm sorry. Could I? This.
Sutta Napata,
Okay.
translated by H. Sadatisa. I will use the chat. Sutta.
Okay. Thank you.
I have the same question, Shoto. Can you tell me where it fits into the Nikayas?
That might be beyond my pay grade. Um, H.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I thought you knew, but I can't place it myself where it comes from or anything. So I was just curious.
Come on.
It's all right.
Hmm. Okay, there. So I have sent that. And it's like, I know that it's in the early scriptures, the actual words of the Buddha. And
Okay.
published by none of that. We have the chapter of the snake, the minor chapter, the great chapter, the chapter of the eight, the chapter of the way to the beyond. And there are 1985.
Okay.
And I encountered it because there's a section in the chapter of the eights that I thought maybe I would go to, but I liked these felt more appropriate. Oh, come on. Oh, disputes and contentions. What are the causes of anger and attachment? So it's like a miniature version of the 12 links, but it's so totally comprehensible. And I've always had trouble with the 12 link. But this thing is like, oh, it's just easy. It's about preferences, and it concludes with the answer in a little different way, the action of contact. And so there is a state where form ceases to exist without ordinary perception and without disordered perception. Anyway, I'm not answering your question, but it's like, that's how I came to be interested in this and finally to buy a copy. Because he would every now and then, offer something from it.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's like, I think you'd probably find it in the Dhammapada.
Yeah.
I haven't been doing a lot of reading of scriptures lately.
Okay.
So, yes.
Thank you.
Is that Catherine? Okay, please.
Hi. Well, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you. I I was feeling this talk, and it reminded me of a couple things. I'd like to say a couple things. Um, when you were talking about your traveling or your wandering days, it reminded me of my 2006, 2007 days. And I wasn't really doing it for a purpose, but I found myself traveling the California coast in a van without much more shelter than that. And I'm reflecting on that time, and there was no desire for items. There was no desire for, when you said you didn't envy anyone else, I recognized that in that time, nor did I.
Aha,
And
that's interesting.
yeah, I mean, I was so caught up in the elements. I mean, I remember being cold at night. I remember taking shelter in the forest when it was raining, and just being so grateful for these natural occurring things. Um, it was a good reminder for me to hear today, and I'm going to be doing some more thinking about that. And then you were talking about kind of the overwhelm that we can get inside that can keep us from being helpful. And it reminded me of what, I was listening to an episode of On Being, this radio program, and I think Joan Halifax was the guest. And this was a while back, but she was talking about compassion fatigue. And I really appreciated how she put it and how you were bringing that up again today, because I don't look at the news. I get it from my husband and I get it from my best friend. And that's about as much as I can handle at this point.
That's very good. But how do they filter the news? Because we all filter it somehow.
I filter them. I usually say, okay, that's a good talk and it's over now, or something of that sort. But um, finding that middle path and making yourself still be useful, it's just a lot to think about. And I'm very glad you brought that up today. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
And finally, talking about consumerism. I mean, oh my gosh. I grew up in the, the 80s, 90s. So I was, it was all about, McDonald's, and it was about Mattel toys, and it was, it was the Ralph Lauren clothing. It was it was a terrible time. Terrible time. And I feel
My
like now that we
kids.
have social media, it's just the
Mhm.
ads, and it's hard to not desire when you're slapped with it time and time again. You open the computer screen or the phone. And so I've been thinking about just trying to limit the phone and the computer as well as the news and focus on what's really happening around me.
Mhm. Yes. Boy, it's a long time ago now that I said to myself, a day of vacation is a day when I don't drive the car or don't do electronics. And I lived at Green Gulch Farm, I don't know, a total of a year and a half, I think. At a time, it was before cell phones. So there were a couple of phones, and you could make a 5-minute call. Or if you had friends in one of the offices, like I worked in the kitchen, and so I could have used the kitchen phone, but it never occurred to me to do that. And then I lived at Tassajara, again, where there was one phone and there was no email. And I mean, nothing worked. Cell phones didn't work at Tassajara. And life becomes more peaceful. And partly it's more peaceful because you're sitting 2 periods of zazen in the morning and 2 in the evening. You have this whole structure, and you have no decisions, no bills, and no money. People get very excited about the town trips where they go and buy whatever you need. It's amazing. um, but the amount of things to desire is reduced, and it makes for more peace, and it frees up your mind to have better relationships and do more study and practice, as we say. I was going to go somewhere. Oh, I was going to mention my mother, and I was a child, and something would be advertised on television, which was black and white. And she would say, "That's a piece of junk." And she would say, I don't know if she said, "I don't burn dollar bills." I said it to my children. Buying that is like burning dollar bills. That's trash. I'm not trash. I'm not, this is not good. So she grew up during the Depression. And so we all have our cultural influences. But the cultural influence of not being attached to consumer things, of course, you can be attached to being a person who doesn't need consumer things or doesn't indulge in consumer things. And I've done that, and it was very hard on the kids. I've been a rigid vegetarian. That was very hard on the kids. But so you can be attached to being a certain kind of person, and then nobody likes you. Think you're so judgmental. So actually following the Buddha's advice makes you a person who's a little more available to people, and it has fringe benefits. It's just like practicing mindfulness has fringe benefits, like you actually get more calm and your life gets better. And practicing the other things is like Yeah, you become more likable. Oh, and then sometimes your mind is clear and you can see how to solve a problem of whatever, a technical problem or a human problem or whatever. I have not yet seen how to end capitalism. I'm just figure. Oh, actually, I have an all-purpose solution, which is ask for help from the trees, the rocks, the rivers, the birds, the mosquitoes. Ask them all for help. That's my all-purpose solution. And there is, I spent some time and found some support for that kind of thought in old Buddhist traditions, mostly of cultures other than our own. But since it seems like, Buddhism kind of saved my life some decades ago, and so I try to be careful about whether I'm staying inside of Buddhism or not. That was a long answer. Oh, yes, more?
I
Yes,
have
please.
more, if that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
I was thinking of a time when I lived in San Francisco and didn't have a cell phone. I had a payphone, and people knew the number of the payphone, but we'd have to plan when I would be at the payphone so that they could call me or I would call them. But it was always an established time. And
Right. Yeah.
it made me so appreciative of those calls. I mean, I can still remember some of those calls because it's not so, I'm not sure of how I want to phrase this, but we have our cell phones and you can take for granted how easy it is to get in touch with your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I noticed when I didn't have a cell phone in San Francisco was that I really appreciated the people that I encountered in real life. I mean, I was down to talk to anyone. And I don't know if that's because I didn't have the phone or I was just a little more in the present.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to think about that some more. But I think that combined with what you're talking about today is really giving me a lot of juice to think about. And so, again, I appreciate you. Thank you.
So this is great. The whole thing of phones. Sometime in my early work career, I was a county social worker, and so they were called clients, but people that we had to do something with. And then some of them didn't have phones. And in those days, certainly in the 50s, it was common not to have a phone. And this would have been in the 70s. And still, there were people to whom you had to call the neighbor, and the neighbor had to go and call them to the phone. And it's like, isn't that kind of unimaginable to bother somebody? You should have your own phone. You should have your own phone, and it's going to cost you $100 a month. But in order to have that phone, because life doesn't work without the phone anymore. Life doesn't work if you don't have home internet anymore, which is, those were landlines. And now more people have phones because you can get a cell phone. But now everybody has smartphones. And so we become accustomed to these things. And I remember saying, 1960 was fine. We could go back to 1960. We had electricity, we had cars. We had a car for the family, and we had a phone. And, but now people are impoverished, but they're required to have a cell phone that costs them a huge amount of money. And they're required to have all these things because no longer does it work without them. I'm just remembering the time when I was living somewhere and I wanted to come to Minnesota Zen Center for the morning service. And so I called to listen to the recording that told me what time stuff was. And the recording says, go check the website.
Yeah.
And I must have had a cell phone, a basic cell phone. But it was like, that's not okay, you know. But it's like the world has moved in this way, and it just continues moving faster and faster and faster. And so I'm like trying to, I mean, my personal response is, well, how can I be useful? Well, if things were desperate, a lot of people could sleep on my floor and forage in my woods, and I have a stash of food. So we would not be comfortable, but I actually do think about that. And I think about getting a viable water system, because I think that's going to happen. But maybe it won't happen during my lifetime. I don't know. It's not at the top of the list right now. But yeah, I live way too much in the future. As the Buddha says, we shouldn't do that. But there we are. Okay, I stop again. Anybody else? Yes.
So me again. So I really appreciate this discussion. So thanks. I'm going to make a second comment too. I'm going to pivot a little bit, but it's about being present. And your Dharma talk really triggered this for me. I was in a conversation yesterday with an old friend who I love. And during the conversation, I became, well, I felt the feeling of being envious. And because, let's see, I won't go into it, but it was a feeling of envy. It was very uncomfortable for me. And what I ended up doing was sort of chatting more and talking more and kind of trying to ignore it and whatever. And what I realized by just pausing and being present, not really even in the conversation, I couldn't do it. I had to, say goodbye to the friend and everything, was a profound sense of grief. It was behind the envy. And so, and I'm actually still dealing with it today. This a sense of grief. But what I also practice too, and I heard this saying, so I was flooded internally. And what I have been noticing and practicing and just being in the present is just kind of some self-loving kindness today. And recognizing the grief, really it was it just is. So
Do you have
that,
any idea what the grief is? Does it have a name, or is it just kind of amorphous
oh no,
grief?
it's a very specific grief, but I can't, I'm not going to go
You
into
don't
it
have to
right
talk
now.
about it.
It's a situational grief,
Mhm.
which I don't, it kind of hit me, how grief is that way, you can be fine and fine and fine, and then something happens, and then you just get this overwhelming sense of grief. But
Mhm.
the initial emotional reaction was sort of this desire, kind of envy,
Mm.
that I wish, my life was different.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and more like this person's, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous,
Mm.
I know this person has had a lot of grief too. I mean, it's just silly. It's silliness. But I had, yeah, I just had to, just
Yes.
do
That
something.
is that is so wonderful a subject to bring up the grief. Every now and then, I have grief about some wrong decision I made in the past. And, I can go back. Most of them are like around college age or in my 20s. And then I started going the other way. But it's like every one of these, like, oh, what if I had adequate Social Security? What if I didn't still have to work for my living? But every one of those turns, I look and I go, well, who would I be? Who would I be now? And there are things about who I am now that I treasure. And that kind of helps me with that loss. And of course, I'm still alive, and so there's still more life to live. But I wonder how much that grief over what we missed or what we didn't have or what we don't have now, I wonder how much that's something that the Buddha is telling us to practice with. So thank you for bringing that forth.
Thank you.
We're drawing to the end of our time here, so I think we'll start to close.
Yeah.
And we're actually, Hokyoji takes a little break from about now till January. So we don't have any speakers signed up for the next 2 Sundays, the Sunday before Christmas and the Sunday before New Year's. And then we'll start back in again. So the next formal event that's on our schedule is the winter practice period, which starts the last week of January. Okay, so now we will just close with our 4 vows. Yeah. Okay. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Okay, everyone.